Hey, it's Andrew here. Welcome to E-commerce Fuel, the show and community dedicated to helping 7- and 8-figure e-commerce brand owners build incredible businesses and amazing lives. And man, back in 2013, over a decade ago, bushy-tailed, bright-eyed podcaster did episode number 1 on the podcast, pretty nascent, and it was not great. So I have a long way to go in terms of improving the craft here, but it was definitely worse then. And here we are, 500 episodes a decade later, and it's been a pretty great experience, a great ride, connect with so many people. And I wanted to do an episode to recap some of the lessons that I have learned. And I'm going to do an episode maybe in the future about podcasting, the technical facets of it. Is it worth it from a business perspective? What kind of gear should you use? Process. But this is more of some of just the lessons about people and dynamics and personality, learning from people that I've learned over those 500 episodes. And also going to share, if you stick around till the end, probably the biggest mistake I have made, one discrete mistake, one episode that I really wish I could do differently. It pains me even to think about it now. So I'll share that near the end. But let's jump into the top lessons I learned from 500 episodes and a decade of podcasting. All right, lesson number 1, direct mediums are so good. Being able to, with a podcast, speak directly to an audience without an intermediary gatekeeper like Facebook or Google or whoever it is something that is a phenomenal asset to have. The leverage you get with media is wild. And the more I look forward into the future of online business and building sustainable, durable businesses, the more I'm really looking to invest primarily, if not exclusively, in assets like this, podcasting, email lists, in person, things like that. So, I think 25% of the members of our community come from this podcast. And there have been so many other wonderful serendipitous relationships, learnings, connections that have happened as a result of it. Number 2, podcasting helps you build up a personal brand and an affinity with people, even if you never met them, assuming you aren't wildly offensive and you have a few redeeming characteristics over time, which is debatable in this position. But so podcasting leads to a personal brand, which leads to unfair advantages and relationships. Anytime I reach out, not anytime, often when I reach out to people in the space, especially if I know that they're kind of, there may be someone who's listened to the podcast or been a guest or something, it helps you connect with people having some kind of personal brand, which you can build with a podcast. It's a cheat code for networking. Number 3, you can do things suboptimally for a really long time. So just because you've been doing something for 10 years at this point in your business, don't assume it's dialed in. I think about this with my podcast now, and there's so many things that we haven't, even after a decade, I look at and I think, why are we doing this way still? And part of it is because probably haven't given it the attention it deserves, especially in the last year or two, in terms of really refining it. So onboarding processes with guests, repurposing materials, putting videos of our podcasts on the internet. Number 4, you don't need to talk to sound smart. And in fact, actually the opposite can sometimes be true. One thing I think that was a tendency from my early days as a podcast host, and I noticed this with a lot of podcast hosts, especially young ones, young in their career, is every time a guest makes a point, they will have to add to that. They'll have to add their own perspective, their own 2 cents. And I think this bleeds over into real life as well. If you're having a conversation with someone, you don't always need to add when they're talking. And in fact, sometimes it's detrimental. Number 5, you never really know what people are capable of, what they will do, or where they're going to end up. And so I am recording this on the day that Klaviyo is IPOing. I think it's roughly maybe a 6 or 7 billion with a B dollar valuation. And it was, 7-8 years ago, I interviewed Ed Halen, who was one of 2 people starting an email marketing company. It was only him and his co-founder, Andrew. The production quality was atrocious. It was total rookie move. And, in 8 years, they've gone to be an $8 billion company. And of course, Ed and Andrew, incredibly smart people, but you just don't know. I interviewed Solo Stove, one of the founders there, early in the days, and they went on to IPO. Sam Parr from My First Million, I was reading back through my old emails. He was an early podcast listener that was emailing back and forth, and of course has gone on to do amazing things. Point being, I think you should never assume that people are going to be fantastic or that they're not going to do anything. I think the point here is don't judge people. Number 6, always follow people's interests and passions when you're trying to connect with them and when you're trying to really get the most interesting, engaging conversations and insights. One of the things I do, and I don't know if I may have stolen this from another podcaster, so I can't claim this necessarily as original, but I always ask people before we record, what are you most excited about? Because 10 times out of 10, if somebody comes up to you and talks with you about your favorite topic for 20 minutes straight, you're going to walk away and say, I had so much fun talking to that person. It wasn't about the person. It was about the fact that they engaged something that you were interested in. So in business, in life, in relationships, find the other person's passion and try to tug on that little thread because it leads to good things. 7, great rapport is such a valuable gift. Don't take it for granted. I want to give a big shout out here to two co-hosts of the podcast. First is Bill D'Alessandro. He must have been on dozens and dozens of times throughout the decade on the show. And then also to Drew Sanaki, who, especially in the early days of the podcast, was a regular co-host. Drew, Bill, thank you so much for being such a regular co-host and helping make this show a success. Deeply appreciate you guys. Number 8, humor is valuable. It kind of goes a little bit in the same theme with rapport, but man, it is hard to dislike. Well, that's not true. There's definitely dislikable, funny people. It is much easier to like people that are light and humorous and that have a good sense of humor. And not everyone can. Some people just aren't funny, even if you work on it. But levity, warmth, those are good runners up. If you can approach conversations on a podcast, in real life, with a sense of levity and warmth, they're just going to go so much better. Other people are going to open up more. Your chances of actually being able to deepen that relationship are so much stronger, and people will enjoy coming away from that interaction with you. Number 9, you get paid to specialize. Shocker, right? Welcome to the E-commerce Fuel podcast, home of just groundbreaking insights and revelations. The rates that we get at ECF versus general entrepreneurship podcasts, I would say are 5 to 10 times the rates of your kind of rack rate for CPMs. And that's because we focus really deeply on 7 and 8 figure e-commerce store owners. We're not dumbing down the conversation. Finally, number 10, brevity is an art. 90% of the time, you will be fine if you stop talking a little bit too early. The same does not apply if you talk too long. And I think about podcast guests, and the best podcast guests are the ones that stop a little bit too early. Maybe they don't share everything. The absolute worst podcast guests are the one where I will ask them, hey, where do you live? And instead of saying New York or California or wherever, they launch into the 45-minute story of their life. It's so hard to try to rein that back in. It hurts the rapport and the relationship and the listener experience and the conversation. So I think people who are master brevity, who can cover a lot of ground and a lot of facts quickly, it's a huge skill. And as promised, the episode that I really wish I could redo, I recorded an episode with somebody I asked them to come on, and they said, hey, I'd love to do it, but you got to wait to air this until 3 or 4 weeks later, because we have some major changes in the company that may require some layoffs. There's some existential issues for people's jobs that we're going to talk about on this podcast. So you got to wait for 3 or 4 weeks. I said, of course, no problem. And due to a huge mess up that was my fault, I have to own it. The episode went out before it was supposed to. We got this email from the guest saying like, what are you doing? Like, this was supposed to go out in 4 weeks. My team cannot see this. And thankfully we were able to get the episode done extremely quickly, but just feeling like I didn't do right by this guest was awful. Anyway, so as a host, make sure you have amazing systems. And this is something I've fixed since then, but make sure you have amazing systems for making sure stuff does not go live until it should, because that can really come back and bite you. Like I mentioned, I'll do an episode after this talking maybe more about in the future about some of the technical aspects, the impact on the business, if a podcast is valuable for an e-commerce business, and some of the more kind of technical things. But if you're listening on YouTube and you like this, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to this. And if you are a 7 or 8 figure store owner, come check us out at E-commerce Fuel. We're the world's largest community of 7 and 8 figure e-commerce brands anywhere. Deep discussions, tons of deep expertise and experience in online and in-person events.